Today on Outside the Box Reviews, Giant Monsters Monday continues. And today we are looking at the Trendmasters Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in San Francisco Micro Playset. I've already reviewed a couple of the old Trendmasters figures that I had, and this one is a little different. This is cashing in on that 90s craze of Polly Pocket and Mighty Max and all the other little micro play sets that were available for kids to mess around with. And I must say, one of the toys that always kind of confused me, because as a kid I always thought, oh, it's small, that means I can take it with me. But there's always little parts that you'd lose, so it was never a good idea. But this comes inside of Godzilla's head. From the material I'm reading online, it appears that this came in two different versions, that you could get the green head like I have here, or you could get the supercharged Godzilla head, which was that grayish black that I had on my actual Trendmasters 10-inch Godzilla, if you saw that review. But as far as a case to hold your playset, this is really cool looking. It's pretty well detailed, and please don't mind the dust on it because there are so many cracks and crevices on it, it's impossible. I sat there with canned air for quite a while and you just can't get dust out of some of those cracks, I guess. But there's some nice texturing to it, definitely a decent sculpt for what it is. He has the big yellow teeth, he has some translucent red eyes that look pretty menacing, and a big nose up front. I think it's a pretty cool little representation of Godzilla. And then of course we have the big hinge here in the back. And then we would take the playset and open it up, and all the parts are gonna fall out on me. So this is as empty as it gets right now. So we have the entire top section is completely empty, and in the bottom we have a little hole here, grass, dirt effect, little watery pit, and then we can start adding in the layers. We have the shell for the other side, which just rests right in there, and now we can see we have a little Alcatraz island on it, an airstrip, more water of course, and then some wreckage back here. And then for the other side here we have a little trap door that will cover up that indentation and level out the water. Then to plug this hole over here, we have a little turret. Will snap into place. Then on top of that, we have our missile launcher. This is a big gray piece of plastic, but it looks like some kind of big sci-fi gun. And that will just pop into place over there. And then that comes with two missiles. Just your classic 90s looking missiles, red chunks of plastic. We can go ahead and slide that right in there. Now we have our missile all set and ready to go. Next up, what would San Francisco be without the Golden Gate Bridge? We have two very red Golden Gate Bridge pieces here. A little crack down the middle. I think you can probably see where this is going. And the bridge will plug into two holes, one on either side of the hinge there, which is kind of nice. It brings a nice unity to the playset, makes it so it's not all just located on one side or separated by the seam. Next up, we get a few buildings, and I don't know much about San Francisco, so you'll have to forgive me. These may be iconic landmarks, but I've been there once and spent most of my time at an abandoned naval base, so don't really know the area too well. We've got this little gray building, decently sculpted. It's got a bunch of little windows sculpted in it, different little layers here on the front. And you can see a jagged bottom to it, and that will match up with its section here on the base, and it will peg in there, not very tight. Next up, we have this little Washington Monument-esque looking building, obviously not, as some fins and a spike on it. I'm sure this is iconic in some way, but a little white building, and that will peg back here. And then a little flat gray building, once again a lot of little windows sculpted into it, and that will peg right here up front. We get a little jet, decently detailed for the size. It's got the cockpit, its wings, some little guns underneath. Not too shabby. And we can of course put that right over at the airstrip if we want. And that is our completed San Francisco, but I feel like this set needs something a little more. Oh wait, maybe some giant monsters to wreak havoc. So we get a little teeny tiny Godzilla figure. He's painted green with red eyes, just like the exterior of the case. He has some silver spines going down his back. And for being so little, he's really well detailed. Not too bad. He's kind of a softer rubbery material, so he's not gonna break or anything. And he's a fitting little Godzilla. So it wasn't a whole lot you could do at this size, I don't think. So you gotta applaud what they did. So why don't we put him here in downtown San Francisco for the time being. And then we get King Ghidorah, the gold golden three-headed dragon, enormous wings. He has red eyes as well and red detail on the inside of his mouth. The dual tails here in the back. Once again, for something so small, it's fairly well detailed and not a bad representation of the character. A lot of people really dislike the artistic license Trendmasters takes with their figures, but being so small, I really don't think there's much room to complain with something like this, and I like it a lot. So we'll put Ghidorah over here on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, and we are ready for a monster face-off. This is pretty cool. So now we can kind of go into the action features of this display. So going back over here to the missile, we of course can rotate it at the base, so it is a little tight. And you could also adjust the angle, but it's so tight on there, and the buildings all have a very tenuous fit, so I don't want to mess with it too much. But this is your standard flick fire missile, so you just come up behind it and you launch the missile out and maybe hit Godzilla, maybe you blow up some of humanity's buildings. You never know, it's a gamble. And of course you can have Ghidorah come over here and smash through the Golden Gate Bridge, breaking it all down and taking that out. And of course we'll want to have him land back on solid ground again. Your Godzilla figure could have his little rampage in downtown San Francisco. He can knock down all these buildings and do his Godzilla worst to everything. Then when he's all done, you could have Godzilla over here by Alcatraz out in the water, and you give Alcatraz a little spin there, and eventually you'll open up the secret trap door and Godzilla will descend back down to the depths. Kind of a stupid little gimmick, but it works. It's kind of a fun way to do things. Then over here on the other side is the feature that I really don't know why it exists. There's a little water door, as I already showed, and it's really a pain in the butt to take off. And then of course we could see the water looks like it's rushing down, there's stuff down there. And then there is a little trap door that will open. But nothing in this set is small enough to pass through that door. And quite honestly, once you're in there, there's no way to actually get your stuff out really, except for through the bottom of the playset. And I really don't know what the purpose of this is. Maybe somebody knows, but I really don't know. Maybe it ties into one of the other sets. This is the only one I ever had. Maybe, and I just realized that now, part of the reason you could take away that water is to actually have the Golden Gate Bridge descending down like it's been crushed and fallen into the ocean. So that is the Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in San Francisco playset. And I've always thought this was kind of a cool little idea. The set itself has some flaws and is just kind of limited by the fact that it is a kid's toy from the 90s, but there's some fun factor going on here. I think a big part of the appeal of the Trendmasters line, for at least me, back when this was coming out, was that Godzilla and his foes were in America. They were in cities I'd been to or had seen and read about a lot more than Japanese cities, which I also just assumed was Tokyo as a kid, but only as an adult kind of realized that there was a lot more variance to the locations Godzilla and his foes were attacking in those films. And at the time, Godzilla had only ever fought in America once in Destroy All Monsters, brief scene. And just in general, as just a monster destruction playset, I thought it always had some kind of cool qualities. It had plane to fight Godzilla with, he had another monster to fight with, he had buildings to knock over, and there was a giant sci-fi missile launcher to go after him. Plus little trapdoors. And then everything, when you're done, cleans up nicely inside the Godzilla head, so there's no real mess left over. You just put the Godzilla head on your shelf and be done with it. It's not gonna be a strong quote-unquote recommendation for this, but it's gonna get one. It's gonna get the cult classic status, just barely. It's a little cheap, it's a little childish, but I like it. Now, Trendmasters did do several other playsets in this vein, and since I'm doing a lot of doubles with Giant Monsters Mondays, I was trying to see if I could find another one to review alongside this, and I never really paid attention to what the other playsets were. And in the Godzilla King of the Monsters line, there was Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla in Los Angeles, and the only one that was available on eBay for me to buy in time to do this review was Godzilla vs. Rodin in New York. And they're both cool looking sets. The Los Angeles one's kind of more of a desert terrain, a little bit of the city, and it looks like a nuclear reactor off in the distance. But the Rodin set actually just kind of felt wrong in retrospect to me. One half of the display has Rodin's lair, a cave or a nest of some kind, and on the other side it has a little Statue of Liberty and downtown New York, complete with destroyable buildings of the Twin Towers and Empire State Building. And obviously this toy was made well before 9/11. It just kind of put me off to the toy. But it should be mentioned, all three in the original series came in this basic same Godzilla head. They all look the same when closed. However, the line did expand to the Godzilla Wars line, and they added some more variation to the set. They reused this basic head again to do Godzilla vs. Biollante in Washington, D.C. They finally actually made Tokyo inside of a giant Space Godzilla head for Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla in Tokyo, which, looking at it, looks really cool. Has some more caves, has some of the giant crystals that Space Godzilla is known for, and has the two transformed halves of Mogura, which is pretty unique. And they had two that weren't actual physical locations in the real world. They had Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla in the Mechagodzilla Defense Base, and then Godzilla vs. Godzilla Force in Mecha King Ghidorah Central Command. Inside of, instead of a head, more of a bust of Mecha King Ghidorah. And the only last thing I want to note on this set is that I think this is an interesting one to be able to review, the San Francisco set, simply because that's where at least some of this new movie is taking place here in 2014. And I saw the story the other day. They have a little miniature diorama set of Godzilla to destroy buildings and stuff that is also the same kind of Golden Gate Bridge, and maybe some of these other buildings are actually shared. I just didn't pay attention enough. But it was prophesized by Trendmasters in the 90s, and now it's finally coming true here in 2014, almost 20 years later. Make sure you check me out on Instagram, username Outside the Box Reviews. Also check me out on Facebook, link below. And until next time, make sure you tune in each Monday for another Giant Monsters Monday, and all week long for reviews of non-giant monster characters. Sayonara.